independent analyst of the global energy market. Boris, can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Good afternoon.
Now, nothing will stop us from discussing the energy crisis in the Russian Federation. Before we start our conversation, I told the viewers that this is probably the most serious fuel crisis in the entire history of independent Russia since 1991. Is that assessment accurate?
Live broadcast, exclusive projects, reports from different corners of the world, all of this is already available in the Freedom app. No complicated setup, no restrictions. Install the Freedom app from the App Store or Play Market and get instant access to content. Freedom. Watch more, know more, all in one click.
The crisis really is the most serious one. However, the numbers you mentioned, that 50% of oil refining capacity has been damaged and put out of commission, should be taken seriously, but also approached more critically. That is, these 50% of the capacity were taken offline at different times. But at any one time, no more than 35% of the capacity was actually put out of commission. So the numbers need to be interpreted correctly overall.
But 35% is still a lot if you look at it that way. But as I understand it, it's not like the whole refinery shuts down. Some part of it keeps working, then they repair it. So that's what explains this kind of dynamic, this kind of change, right?
Well, that's not the only reason. If one of the refineries, let's say, is damaged, then the oil is redirected to other refineries. The periods of downtime due to major repairs are reduced, and the processing capacity increases in the short term. And this leads to a situation where, at the same time, about 35% are not operating, but never 50%. If you look at, say, the daily dynamics, well, the latest data for May, then Russia lost about 3 million, around 2.85 million tons per day. That's 35% of the daily processing capacity. But if we add up all the downtimes of the major refineries, starting with the Omsk refinery, the largest one, then we get per year, we get 50%. That is 365 million tons per year. This doesn't mean that these losses happened all at once. And now the crisis has eased a bit since the intensity of the Ukrainian armed forces strikes has decreased. And the air defense systems at the major refineries are working more effectively. And at least the major cities are now being supplied more or less satisfactorily. But of course, in rural areas and remote regions, there is quite a serious shortage of petroleum products.
Boris, if it becomes possible to raise this instantaneous indicator to 50%, what would that lead to? Can we say that some irreversible consequences would then begin for Russia's fuel and energy sector?
I've been asked this question repeatedly over the past few months. In order to simultaneously put out a commission of 50% of the oil refining capacity, the intensity of the strikes would need to be increased by at least 1.5 times. I am not sure. I'm not a military expert, and I'm not sure that the armed forces of Ukraine currently have such technical capabilities. But if it's 35%, that's actually a kind of Rubicon. If more than 35% is put out of commission at the same time, then a truly irreversible collapse begins of the fuel market and, in a broader sense, the fuel and energy market.
If you look at the measures that the Russian Federation is taking, in particular, the relevant ministry and the deputy prime minister, they're always reporting to Putin that they're doing something. How effective are these steps in restoring the damaged infrastructure, the entire logistics chain? How would you assess their effectiveness?
Well, there are measures that are medium term and long term. For example, Nothing has been done all these years of war regarding the repurposing of the entire logistics chain to operate during wartime. And even if such decisions are made now, it'll take many months to implement them. There are more, let's say, short-term solutions. First and foremost, that's imports. Besides that, even within the existing system of logistics chains, transferring petroleum products from one region to another can definitely help as well. In the last, well, probably 2 weeks, the government has started to take some more or less clear steps in this direction. Before that, decisions were being made that were completely disconnected from reality. For example, the creation of a network of mini oil refineries, meaning the production of straight run gasoline, which, of course, cannot be used as fuel without secondary processing, or lowering environmental standards to Euro 3, and even, in some cases, to Euro 2, which, of course, has a very negative impact on the operation of internal combustion engines, especially foreign cars. So, right now, the crisis is, let's say, faded into the background a little bit. That doesn't mean it has been overcome. That doesn't mean that the government's measures are effective. As I've said many times, the most effective method would be to let prices float freely and bring the balance of supply and demand to a new level, as well as to reduce the tax burden on the oil refining industry. But that's not being done, and most likely it won't be done.
And how does all this affect the energy giants of the Russian Federation? Lukoil, Rosneft, basically everyone involved in this state run business. Are they affected by what's happening?
Well, here the government, of course, is making efforts. First of all, there's the price damper. The government compensates them for the losses they incur as a result of their oil refining capacities not operating at full capacity. In addition, there's what's called creeping monopolization going on. For example, recently, the Ukrainian armed forces struck the Tumen oil refinery. In the past, it was called Antipinski. This refinery is probably the only one among the top 20 that's independent. It doesn't belong to any vertically integrated company. It has private, independent owners. And this refinery supplied gasoline to independent gas stations. Otherwise, independent gas stations have to buy gasoline on the exchange, the St. Petersburg Stock Exchange. Not the stock exchange, sorry, the St. Petersburg Commodity Exchange. And of course, prices at these gas stations are a bit higher. But at least there was a certain level of diversification, both in supply and in the distribution of petroleum products. Now, I think the big companies will simply take over these independent gas stations, which, as far as I know, are already being sold in some regions for just a few 100,000 rubles. In other words, they're being sold for next to nothing because their owners are taking daily losses since they're not receiving petroleum products. So you see, for the big companies, the outcome here is kind of mixed. There's a phrase in English, too big to fail, which was first used during the financial crisis of 2008. They're simply too big to let them sink.
Obviously, the energy crisis is affecting the agricultural sector. We also reported on this before our interview. I'm curious, as we get closer to the heating season, are these things connected or are they unrelated? And by the way, experts note that Ukraine isn't targeting gas stations, the stations that heating depends on and that are responsible for simply having gas in residential buildings. Or will what's happening now eventually affect the heating season as well?
Yes, the Ukrainian armed forces really don't touch strictly civilian facilities, but as we know, oil refineries produce not only fuel for cars and agricultural machinery and military equipment, but also a certain amount of fuel oil. So, heavy fuel oil is frequently used for the large-scale generation of electrical power in a wide variety of different geographical regions and across numerous industrial sectors. Therefore, here, of course, the strikes by the Ukrainian armed forces and the disruption or damage to oil refining capacities will definitely have an impact, including on the heating season. So to speak, Absolutely everything you see here is deeply and intricately interconnected. Essential energy, fuel for our cars, various types of agricultural and military vehicles, as well as the vital fuel needed for power plants.
We have a couple more minutes. Boris, I wanted to specifically talk about Crimea during this time. There's a special situation on the temporarily occupied Ukrainian peninsula. In this sense, things there are probably much more serious than in Russia. And how would you describe what's happening there?
It's definitely serious there because there's a crisis. Crimea doesn't have its own oil refining, and 100% of petroleum products have to be imported. Since there are two transport arteries into Crimea, and they are both heavily targeted by the Ukrainian armed forces, the delivery of petroleum products is extremely complicated, and Crimea is in a real crisis situation. But the situation was made a little easier by the fact that the authorities have essentially managed to completely stop vacationers from coming. In other words, vacationers practically aren't coming to Crimea now because they can't get any gasoline. So for Crimeans, there are very strict limits, 30, maybe even 20 liters per person. And in the near future, there's no sign that the situation will improve because here the problem isn't oil refining, but delivery. This crisis is connected to the delivery of petroleum products to Crimea.
Well, Boris, I appreciate such a knowledgeable conversation with you. All the best to you. We look forward to having you on our broadcasts. Boris Ehrenstein, an independent analyst of the global energy market, was the guest in this segment.